All right, hello, and welcome back to the other top 4 match of the Game Cafe Midseason Showdown held in Independence, Missouri. We now have Drew Nowak versus Joshua Adams. So both of these Drew was 4-0. He was the undefeated going into Top Cut, and Josh took one loss to Ethan in these Swiss rounds. So we'll see how this ends up turning out. Looks like Whitney is not here, RIP. Hopefully he will be back soon. In the meantime, we've got Drew here running his team of Slowbro, Rhyperior, Tapu, Koko, Kartana, Salamence, and Incineroar versus Joshua's Abomasnow, Braviary, Tapu, Koko, Incineroar, Porygon 2, and Araquanid. Now, I wouldn't call either of these teams conventional, but I think that Drew is running maybe a little more of a standard build. Obviously, Slowbro and Rhyperior aren't something that you see every day. So, nevertheless, we're going to have to... I hope he gets to bring the Rhyperior. I think Rhyperior is a really cool Pokemon. Colin Hire was running that Rhyperior at various regionals the last year that I went to. One of the most recent ones being the Madison Regional. And I think it's really cool. A really strong Pokemon in a Trick Room. Its Z-move is just really good. So we see a Tapu, Koko, and a Rhyperior lead. So this is really interesting. I hope it's not the case that he goes for some electric move that's like a single target and the Rhyperior has Lightning Rod. I don't know if this Rhyperior has Lightning Rod or not. It could have Solid Rock that allows it to take its super effective attacks better, which is obviously useful, but Lightning Rod is also useful for protecting Slowbro and in general, walling opposing Tapu Koko. So we see a Choice Scarf Braviary revealed. Superpower does significant damage to the Rhyperior, and yeah, that did more than I expected it was going to. A Nature's Madness comes out into the Porygon 2, so I imagine this is probably a double target on Drew's side into the Porygon 2. And we see a Continental Crush coming out from the Rhyperior. Now, Rhyperior doesn't have too many rock moves that are that strong. It has Rock Slide and Stone Edge, but it does have one that's really, really strong, and that's Rock Wrecker. So if this is based off of Rock Wrecker, Z Rock Wrecker, I'm not sure its actual base power, but it's pretty good. So I imagine this will knock out the Porygon 2 without much difficulty, as it does. The Braviary was able to get its Scarf Superpower off on the Rhyperior, but now it's in a horrible position. Superpower may or may not be threatening a knockout on the Rhyperior afterwards, but even if it does, then it's going to have to probably take an electric move in return. The Abomasnow here is in a good position, though. Even though Abomasnow probably isn't going to be faster than the opposing Rhyperior, a Blizzard is going to do significant damage to the Tapu Koko, and it will certainly knock out the Rhyperior from this range. So if Josh wants to switch out the Braviary to maintain some positioning, that really opens up Drew to be able to, like, for example, Nature's Madness and Rock Slide, and that would be not good for Josh if that happens to take a knockout. I'm not confident it would, though, because this Abomasnow has Mega Evolved, and Abomasnow gains a decent bit of defense as it Mega Evolves, but we'll see what happens here. Protect comes out, so I imagine a Superpower into the Rhyperior is what's happening, and hoping that either the Superpower or the combination of that and Hail, which in this case it will just be the Hail, will knock it out. We see an Electro Whip from Tapu Koko, so if this Rhyperior does have Lightning Rod, it's very cleverly hiding it, as the spread moves aren't redirected into Lightning Rod if they're used by your ally like this. So, interestingly enough, it does raise the Braviary's attack via Defiant, but a Rock Slide, assuming it connects, which it does knock out the Braviary. If it didn't connect, that could be potentially bad, because then then you'd have to deal with a neutral Superpower again, but nevertheless, I think Drew was fine with making that trade. Rhyperior knocked out the Porygon 2 from half health and finished off the knockout on Braviary, so that's pretty good for him. Tapu Koko still isn't feeling the greatest versus Abomasnow. Nevertheless, having revealed Nature's Madness and Electro Web, and given its high HP stat, this is certainly Assault Vest on his Tapu Koko. So, and with the Incineroar coming in, that is threatening the Abomasnow very heavily. If this is Assault Vest Tapu Koko, it's unlikely that he'll be able to knock out the Araquanid in one shot. Even potentially a double target of, say, a Thunderbolt and a knockoff, assuming he even has Thunderbolt, which may Assault Vest Koko drop, might not be enough. The Abomasnow does get a double protect, though, as Tapu Koko opts for the Nature's Madness into the Araquanid, so potentially this is a double target into that slot. If knockoff is able to pick up the knockout there, that'd be good. But no, a safe play. Goes for the Flare Blitz into the Abomasnow. Liquidation will not knock out the Incineroar thanks to that Intimidate. Lowers the defense, which is negligible at this stage of the game. And now Abomasnow, having used a double protect, is very unlikely to get a triple protect. Moreover, Tapu Koko should be able to threaten some big damage here with Electro Web. It likely won't knock out the Araquanid, but if the Araquanid is not holding a berry, then it'll put it into KO range of another Electro Web, and then potentially Drew's last Pokemon will be able to handle it no matter what. We do not see a triple protect attempt come out. Instead, we see a Volt Switch which knocks out the Araquanid. So, given that Volt Switch did knock out the Araquanid, this should be game. I can't imagine that Drew would try to go for a knockoff in this position. Either Flare Blitz or even U-turn would seem more likely. And Kartana in the back would wrap things up anyway. It doesn't enjoy taking Blizzard from Mega Abomasnow, but nevertheless it would do a lot of damage. So yeah, Flare Blitz is able to knock out the Mega Abomasnow before it's able to unfortunately do anything. All it did was get a double protect and set the hay up for a Rhyperior knockout, but certainly not what he probably wanted to see at the end of the day. But that was really well played by Drew. I like how he prioritized stop the Trick Room, and then you're just going to be faster than your opponent. The Scarf Braviary was annoying for him, but since it wasn't able to pressure a knockout on either Rhyperior or the Tapu Koko, it meant that it was a relatively safe lead, a relatively safe Nature's Madness, and Z move into the Porygon 2 slot. So I really like the way that Drew played that set, rather than say, well, I have a Trick Room mode too. I have Slowbro and I have Rhyperior, and Incineroar is relatively slow as well. He said, no, I'm not going to mess with that. I'm just going to fight you out of Trick Room, where I'm going to be naturally faster in most cases. Josh locking in his team quite quickly again. We saw them do that in Game 1, and Drew quickly follows suit. This match is nobody's pulling any punches here. We're just going straight into it, and I quite like it. It's very exciting to watch these two players go back and forth. Drew opts to switch up his lead instead now with a Tapu Koko and Kartana against Incineroar and Porygon 2. So I imagine that Josh is pretty happy about seeing the Kartana as the lead. Getting down the initial Intimidate is really nice. A Nature's Madness and a Sacred Sword could potentially knock out the Incineroar, depending on how the Kartana is trained and its stats and all those things. Porygon 2 also importantly gets a special attack boost, meaning its Ice Beams will do more damage to the Kartana and to whatever comes in later, importantly Rhyperior. So the Incineroar here is technically exerting Fake Out pressure, but Fake Out may not even be needed. A Fake Out on Tapu Koko would be okay. A Flare Blitz would also be alright, but we see Tapu Koko actually hard switch out, not wanting to risk a Fake Out and go for a Bolt Switch. Rhyperior comes in, likely anticipating the Trick Room that's going to come up. Fake Out does go into the Tapu Koko. This would prevent something like a Sky Drop potentially. Given the Swords Dance that's coming up, potentially that was a Sky Drop. And we see Porygon 2 set Trick Room. Rhyperior being naturally slower than Incineroar is a great advantage for Drew here, assuming his Rhyperior is actually slower than the Incineroar. And it's able to pressure a significant amount of damage with a Z Rock attack into the Incineroar. I'm not sure how much a regular Rock Slide would do to Incineroar. I highly doubt it knocks it out from full though. The Kartana is able to pressure the Porygon 2 with a Sacred Sword, but it's going to take a significant amount of damage from Ice Beam. We saw that this Kartana has Swords Dance, so it's not one of those bulky Assault Vest sets. And we actually see the Z move fired off right away. So if this goes into Porygon 2, I don't think it's likely that it'll knock it out in a single blow. But if it does go into the Incineroar, it will do certainly enough damage to knock it out in one shot. And it is going to the Incineroar. So Incineroar there, probably trying to get a Flare Blitz off on this Kartana. This could be interesting. If he thought he was going to be successful in getting the Flare Blitz off on Kartana, he may have Ice Beamed into the Rhyperior. If he does that, then this Kartana is in a really good spot, but the Kartana does take the Ice Beam. It does a lot of damage, and Sacred Sword is going to do a lot of damage in return. It did a lot of damage, doing nearly 75 to 80% the Sacred Sword. Dealt a healthy amount of damage to Porygon 2. We also saw the Rhyperior is confirmed slower than the Porygon 2, but Araquanid comes in. I'm actually not certain on the speed tiers between Araquanid and Rhyperior, so it's possible here that the Araquanid could underspeed. I think if the Rhyperior is the solid rock ability, I don't think a Liquidation would knock it out in one shot thanks to Rhyperior's naturally high defense, but it has to consider that. If this Rhyperior is slower, then it's in a fantastic spot, but it's not. A Liquidation comes out. Let's see if it's able to survive this attack. It's not. It faints in one blow. That was a huge miscalculation, I think, by Drew, perhaps expecting his Rhyperior to be slower, or maybe not really having a better switch in the back. Because of this, Ice Beam is able to knock out the Kartana in the follow-up attack. So, forcing the Ice Beam here does deny the Porygon 2 a recover, but with Tapu Koko in the back, and we also see Incineroar. So Incineroar and Tapu Koko in the back, he can probably get a knockout on the Porygon 2 if he really wants to. He could go for a Fake Out and Volt Switch that probably should do enough damage at this point to the Porygon 2. Unless I'm underestimating Porygon 2. This is Assault Vest Tapu Koko after all. But nevertheless, that leaves the Araquanid wide open. This Araquanid, with its Water Bubble ability, and also its good HP, is going to be able to take Flare Blitzes and Electric type attacks from the Tapu Koko and the Incineroar fairly well, and deal a significant amount of damage back with Liquidation. Liquidation is probably a 2-hit KO on the Assault Vest Tapu Koko. Again, I'm not certain of the damage calc there, but nevertheless, it's certainly a 2-hit KO on the Incineroar. And if Josh manages to find prior damage on the Incineroar, he'll be able to knock it out without triggering the berry. So we see a Fake Out come out onto the Porygon 2. Does not very much damage, and the Liquidation goes into the Incineroar, just wanting to deal a huge chunk. And will activate the Incineroar's berry, which also means he's threatened by a Liquidation on the following turn, but the Porygon 2 is unable to recover or use some other attack. And the Volt Switch comes out into the Porygon 2. Probably going to knock it out. Oh, it doesn't knock it out! The Assault Vest on Tapu Koko there. Perhaps the EVs being placed in speed and bulk, leaving not much for a special attack. Or also the combination of Porygon 2's incredibly high bulk as it is, allowing it to survive based on those factors. And Liquidation easily knocks out the Incineroar. Incineroar don't commonly run Protect, so that was a fairly safe play. And now the Porygon 2 using Recover is going to make it nearly impossible to knock out the Tapu Koko here, going for a Volt Switch into the Araquanid. I really like that play. Not really because it's going to win him the game. We see a berry reveal, so that's important. So we got information out of that. He actually wouldn't have gotten that information if it had not crit. We also see the important information that the Araquanid is holding the Weaky Berry. So Weaky Berry confirms that Araquanid ends min speed, because if you were Adamant Nature, that would have confused the Araquanid. So the Araquanid running min speed, which is what Drew probably expects after seeing the Rhyperior they undersped. Yeah, this isn't good. A Volt Switch comes out into the Araquanid, not able to do that much damage. And Ice Beam comes out from the Porygon 2, interesting. I think this is potentially an opening for Drew to gain information. I don't think an Ice Beam... Ice Beam may knock out the Tapu Koko from this range. The stream started a bit, so I didn't get to see the exact damage. I apologize on that. But if the Porygon 2 is able to... Or if the Porygon 2 is unable to knock out the Tapu Koko with Ice Beam, Drew gets the last Pokemon information, so that would be nice for a game plan into Game 3. But an Ice Beam isn't enough to knock Tapu Koko out. That was probably just on my end, being unable to recognize the damage. So good adjustments there from Joshua. I think very clearly the adjustment there that was so important was he got up Trick Room. Being able to get up Trick Room was huge. The Araquanid's Liquidation was able to knock out Rhyperior in one hit. He was able to threaten the Kartana with boosted Ice Beams. And in general, he was winning the damage trade significantly. Moreover, Drew was unable to knock out the Porygon 2 in the final stages of the game, meaning that he was only able to get that fourth Pokemon information. But I imagine it would probably be the Abomasnow in the back. I can't imagine he would bring Tapu Koko or Braviary, but you don't know for sure, and Drew's probably thinking in the back of his mind, like, what was the last Pokemon? But I imagine you're expecting it to be the Abomasnow. So now Drew has won Game 1, but lost Game 2. And this was, I think, clearly dictated by the speed control implemented there. It seemed in Game 2, Drew potentially was trying to get a bit cheeky, potentially go for a Sky Drop with your Tapu Koko onto the Porygon 2, go for a Swords Dance, and then knock out the Porygon 2 on the way down with a +2 Swords Dance. But really sort of discounting the potential of Incineroar messing that plan up, and I think Josh was wise to bring his Incineroar. Not only does it pressure with the immediate Intimidate, but it also pressures with the immediate Fake Out, and that importantly lets Porygon 2 get up that Trick Room. Porygon 2 getting up Trick Room means there's no one attack that Drew has that's really going to be able to nuke it. The Rhyperior can do a good chunk with its Z, potentially Rock Wrecker. I'm assuming it's Rock Wrecker. So the Z Rock Wrecker would do a significant chunk to the Porygon 2, but it wouldn't knock it out in a single hit. And because it's in Trick Room, that's really the only thing that Drew's got to underspeed it, besides brings a Slowbro, which would be a potential risk. Josh, seeing the success of his lead in Game 2, opts to lead Porygon 2 and Incineroar again, as Drew mixes it up for the third game and brings Incineroar and Rhyperior. So, importantly, or really importantly, on a Trick Room team, we see the Intimidate from Josh's Incineroar go before the Intimidate of Drew's Incineroar. This means that unless it's a speed tie, the Fake Out from Josh's Incineroar will be faster, and their Incineroars in Trick Room will favor Drew's speed. Rhyperior is still probably threatening a knockout on the Incineroar with a Z Rock Wrecker, but I can't imagine that, he doesn't want to do that. If you do that, then Araquanid comes in, and that's pretty bad. Tapu Koko comes in, but nevertheless, this is looking like it's going to be a Trick Room get set up. Incineroar from Josh's side does move first and opts to Fake Out Drew's Incineroar as Porygon sets Trick Room after the Incineroar flinches. We didn't get to see what Drew attempted to do there because of that flinch, but because of the Trick Room being set up, Drew is in a very precarious position. Because he has Incineroar out in the field early, using knockoff on the Porygon 2 could be very instrumental for him. By knocking off the Porygon 2's Eviolite, he will set it up for a KO attack from the Rhyperior. Definitely at neutral. I couldn't be sure about at -1, but nevertheless it will still be a great benefit to him. Tapu Koko has the option, if it does have Skydrop, to go for a Skydrop in Trick Room to waste turns that way. He could go for a Volt Switch. That would allow him to bring in his own Rhyperior again, especially if Josh opts to U-turn or Hard Switch into his Araquanid. A Volt Switch would at least punish it with some damage. We see a Porygon 2 just opt for the Thunderbolt. That's going to do some damage to the Incineroar, but not that much. A knockoff comes off into the Porygon 2, and we will see a knockoff from Josh's Incineroar into Drew's Incineroar, knocking off the Super Citrus Berry as Volt Switch goes into the Porygon 2. So if I'm Drew, I think I'm pretty happy with how this turn played out. Rhyperior is going to come back in, and that's already 2 turns of Trick Room done. You just have 3 more to go. And at the moment, if Rhyperior comes in, then nothing is being especially pressured. You do probably have to respect the Porygon 2 enough that you'll probably attack into it anyway. But nevertheless, it's unlikely that Araquanid is going to try to hard come in on a Z Rock attack. And if it does, Drew is probably happy about that trade. I imagine the Incineroar on Josh's side will be going out. We've seen the interaction between these Incineroars 3 times in a row. So it's probable that his Incineroar is, in fact, the faster one or slower in Trick Room. We do just see the Z Rock, so whichever of these Pokemon that Drew targeted, it is definitely going to faint. Incineroar, I can't imagine it goes into Incineroar here, because it seems like the Porygon 2 was such a big issue to break in that Game 2, and his prioritizing out in Game 1, I think, indicates that this Z Rock into Porygon 2 is definitely what he wants to do. So that'll knock that out. Incineroar on Drew's side also goes for the U-turn, so this will allow him some positioning, probably going into Tapu Koko. This allows you to have the option of, again, Skydrop, potentially Volt Switch, as long as he doesn't have Lightning Rod on his Rhyperior, that play would work. But the Incineroar opts for a Flare Blitz. This will do some damage to the Tapu Koko, but not very much, thanks to that natural bulk of, thanks to the bulk of Tapu Koko invested because of its Assault Vest and the Intimidate that we saw earlier. Flare Blitz not doing very much damage. Excuse me. We see Araquanid come in, and that's no surprise to me. A Liquidation here is threatening huge damage on the Rhyperior. We don't know exactly if the -1 is going to be a significant impact here. For example, will a -1 liquidation knock out the Rhyperior? If it doesn't, then he can just hard switch his Rhyperior out. But it seems that a Protect from Rhyperior, probably a Volt Switch into an Incineroar is his play. I really like this, because you might be saying, well, why didn't you just switch in the Incineroar directly? That would have applied the Intimidate immediately, and no, he wouldn't have survived the attack. Well, that's why he didn't do that. But what he did there was probably Volt Switch. If you go for a Volt Switch there, then you're able to Volt Switch out into your Incineroar safely regardless. Which again, to me, implies that this is Solid Rock on this Rhyperior and not Lightning Rod. But he could have also potentially just gone for a Sky Drop or some other play. You can't Sky Drop the Totem Araquanid. That's the one advantage of Totem Araquanid that you can get with it. Because it's bigger, it happens to be heavy enough that it can't be picked up by Sky Drop, which is important in this matchup. We haven't seen a Sky Drop from the Assault Vest Tapu Koko yet, but Assault Vest Tapu Koko does typically carry Sky Drop, so we'll see what happens here. Rhyperior is recalled, and instead switches out into the Kartana. I imagine this has to be a fake out into the Abomasnow. Or not into the Abomasnow, excuse me, into the Araquanid. This would deny the liquidation into the liquidation into the Incineroar, and he really would prefer having Incineroar around for this late game. Abomasnow opts for the Energy Ball, so not going for the Blizzard there. Potentially not confident that Blizzard would knock out the Rhyperior. But this Kartana means that it comes in for a lot less damage than he might have had to take otherwise. It's still going to Feint easily to another Blizzard, but for example, Araquanid's liquidation could have been threatening it in a couple turns, depending on how the damage is played out. Incineroar now on Josh's side is in a prime position, I think, to switch in. You've got to be liking the idea of intimidating these two physical attackers, but at what cost is he going to get for coming in if he does opt to do that? A Sacred Sword from Kartana into Abomasnow would do a significant chunk of damage with the Incineroar. Yeah, we've seen U-turn from this Incineroar on Drew's end. I imagine he's not going to try to play around with this Abomasnow, potentially going for Protector, switching into Incineroar. I imagine this is a U-turn coming out, but if not, then the Araquanid could take a knockout on an Incineroar, and that would be very important for Josh. This opposing Incineroar that Josh is facing is being a problematic nuisance here in these last few turns. A Swords Dance comes out from Kartana, so a wise play there is a Flare Blitz goes into the Abomasnow. So Drew there saying, if you don't do something about my Flare Blitz into Abomasnow, you are going to, if you don't do something about this, I get a Sword Stance no matter what you do. But a substitute comes up from Araquanid, and I think this is probably really annoying for Drew if you're in Drew's perspectives. The substitute from Araquanid is not so important that it will block some attack from Drew's field, so he won't be like blocking a Spore or something like that. But it requires that the Kartana spends 2 turns to knock out the substitute, and that's huge. Because the Blizzard didn't go onto the Kartana earlier on, it's still not in liquidation KO range, but nevertheless, I imagine something along the lines of a Sacred Sword and maybe a U-turn. Maybe he went off to risk the just straight up fake out into the Incineroar. We'll see what happens from here, but I like the positioning that Drew's got here. His Sacred Sword is threatening immense damage on the Incineroar and the Abomasnow in the back, and that is why the fake out from Josh's side lands into that. Incineroar's knockoff into Araquanid, is that going to break the sub? It does break the sub. It importantly will not remove the berry since it was behind a substitute, but that's one less resource that Josh has to deal with, or that Josh has to use in order to deal with this opposing Kartana. Kartana is enormously threatening at this stage in the game. Incineroar, I don't think if it comes in and out and goes for a fake out, I don't believe it will be able to activate its berry via hail, and that's really important. If the Incineroar is unable to activate its berry, it's always going to be in Sacred Sword KO range, and it's probably going to be always in Sacred Sword KO range as it is. As the Rhyperior comes out, I think that Drew is really liking his position. A Sacred Sword into Incineroar is relatively safe. It's hard for him to get punished by doing that. And a Rock Slide from Rhyperior, as we've seen before, Rhyperior was faster than Araquanid because Araquanid moved first in Trick Room. So unless it was a speed tie, which would be Very interesting if the Rhyperior and the Araquanid happen to speed tie this Rock Slide. I'm assuming it connects and assuming it is a Rock Slide, should knock out this Araquanid. It does come out, it does connect, the Araquanid will faint to this Rock Slide, and now only one of Joshua's Pokemon remains. The Kartana, excuse me. The Kartana being boosted because of its previous Swords Dance and its boost from Beast Boost, is likely threatening a 1-hit KO on this Abomasnow as it is. Abomasnow, it is not uncommon for Abomasnow to run Ice Shard, so potentially a Protect into Ice Shard could knock out the Kartana. I think it's unlikely because Kartana does have some pretty good defense on it, but this is still going to be right down to the wire. Even if the Abomasnow happens to survive this, well, it has to survive the Sacred Sword now, and dodge a Rock Slide, but neither of those things happen, and Drew comfortably, I think, takes Game 3. That Kartana, and setting up the Swords Dance and pinning everything, really, with its high-powered attacks, he was able to outlast the turns of Trick Room that Josh set up. Despite this, despite that Trick Room win up in Game 3, the amount of damage that he did was negligible. He didn't get enough for what he needed. I think the key turn from my perspective was that Energy Ball versus that Blizzard on the Kartana. Again, I'm not aware of the Blizzard versus Rhyperior damage counts. Perhaps he was expecting a solid rock Rhyperior or in general expecting that to live, and so he is like, well, I want to Energy Ball here and guarantee that knockout, but Kartana coming in for much less health than it should have, I think really affected the end game for that situation. Not being able to pressure the Kartana with Araquanid, not being able to pressure it with late game Ice Shard, things of that sort. And so now that Drew has won this top 4 set in a 2-1, we will be advancing on to the finals for a repeat of Swiss with Drew Nowak versus Ethan Simpson. So stay tuned until we get that set up.